help build a culture where we realise that if a child's emotionally and mentally happy, then they're going to learn in the best possible way. So obviously, a child who's scared or frightened isn't in a position where they're going to learn, and helping to spread those messages that emotional health is just as important, if not more so, really, as academic learning. Also got an interest in internet safety, which has obviously been a big thing during the lockdown as well. Absolutely. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you very much. First of all, guys, thank you very much for kind of giving up your time and kind of put yourself forward, kind of take part in this panel. How are we all doing today?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, good. Enjoying the sunshine?
Yeah. Not today.
Not today.
Too busy.
Good stuff. So, guys, today's topic is around kind of supporting our children and young people kind of returning to school. It's a topic that's, I guess, been quite hot in the media over the last 2 weeks with Boris's announcement a few Sundays ago about those kind of steps to kind of first start with primary schools to kind of return those students, and then looking at secondary schools a little bit later on. I guess the purpose of today's webinar is to kind of, look at supporting parents and supporting teachers, and I guess kind of education leaders of how we can really support our most vulnerable children as they kind of return to school. It's something that this is such a complete uncertain time. It's a time that no one really knows where it's going to kind of lead to. So I think it's quite important to kind of just share those kind of tips and those things that we can do just to help our young people. You guys as well, thank you for listening in. I think you guys are really important as well. I'm sure we've got lots of teachers and education leaders that are kind of tuned in today. So I think you guys as well, just as important as sharing about what you're doing in your schools, sharing, stuff that's kind of worked for you and your young people, and parents as well, exactly the same. Cool, we're gonna get started. First of all, Sak and Rona, I know you guys have school-age children. How are they kind of feeling about potentially going back to school?
Well, I mean, what I've seen, the picture I've seen working with children and sort of remaining, having or continuing an involvement of working with children throughout this period. Definitely at the beginning of the lockdown, it was as if everybody went into shock. Sort of survival mode, I guess. I mean, this is a trauma. It's presenting as a trauma in many ways to a lot of people. Definitely at first, everything went quiet. Everything went quite quiet at my work, but then everybody was doing really well. They were really happy to not have school as a pressure. Then we saw a bit of a picture of where families were struggling a little bit, sort of settling in, arguments, that type of thing. And now it feels as if we've moved into an acceptance phase. We've kind of got into a routine of this new way of working. And of course, with Boris's announcement, that's kind of shaken things up a little bit and raised a few anxieties again with the realization that although it's been quite nice being off school and there hasn't been those pressures, that those pressures will return in many different ways.
Absolutely. I think a lot of teachers I kind of spoke to have kind of said, how their children are coping at home, but as we go into that next stage and we start to talk about going to school and things being kind of unlifted, those kind of anxieties start to creep in. Sak, you've got 3 children, all of school age. How are they kind of feeling about potentially going back in?
Just similar to what Rona was saying, I think after overcoming that initial shock as a parent and as somebody who has a business, and if you add everything else that was going on, and then you add in homeschooling for a year 7 pupil, a year 2 and a year 1, that really did become a bit of a challenge. And touching on what Rona was said, I think we were all being very reactive to what was happening, and we were always on the back foot. And over the last, over the duration of lockdown, I found myself being able to be a bit more proactive with almost what the kids are learning, which bits, personally speaking, I might not cover that the school have sent, but I can see there might be a need for the pupil, for my children to learn something about geography that has come up. So I think, and whether this is for everybody, I'm not sure, but I think that bit of space has allowed me as a parent to think a bit more proactively about lockdown and how we might come out of that. And even though I'm an ex-teacher, I want to promise you that did not help at all initially with teaching my children. And I almost had to really reflect on my own practice and think about what is working and what isn't. So it was a challenge, and it is a challenge, Chase. And I think that's the honest and real answer that I can give. Yeah,
I think, like you said, Zach, it's really important to kind of realise it's not just children that are going through this, it's, you know, adults ourselves who also have to deal with this kind of uncertainty, new ways of working. And sometimes it can be, we can easily forget about our own mental health when we're there to support others. So I think it's, we need to definitely kind of check in with our own emotions and how we're feeling as well. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Helen, I know you've been kind of supporting children and kind of delivering lessons kind of virtually online. Kind of how are the children that you're kind of speaking to, how are they kind of feeling about potentially going back in?
I'm not in direct contact with the children. I'm working more, because I'm working from home at the moment. So I'm in touch with the staff, supporting the staff with preparing of the online learning, and the staff are in communication with the children more directly. So I can't really answer that, to be honest. I have called some vulnerable families sort of over the period of time that we've been off. But at the moment, I'm not in touch with them. It's more the class teachers, the familiar voices on the phone, the head teacher I know has been doing an awful lot of calling. But as far as preparing for coming back, that's been my big role with the head teacher, supporting her with what we're trying to put in place to help the children, support them on their return in a week or so's time.
So what kind of challenges are you kind of expecting for the, you know, some children coming back to be faced?
I think the main concern is obviously there's going to be huge anxieties. They've been at home. It's like coming back after the summer holidays. Children are anxious, but this is a longer period and there's a lot more been going on that they're going to be a little bit, if not a lot, anxious about. So that's what we're bearing in mind. And we're trying as hard as we can to keep the routine as consistent as it has been in the past, and trying to bring them back to as much of a normal place as we can. Obviously, there's huge changes, but we're trying to put structure into the day. Familiar faces, we're quite fortunate in that we've got quite a large staff that are still able to work in school. So, you know, we've got the familiar faces in the little bubbles. They're in small groups. We're welcoming them on the gate, showing them the systems. And one of the biggest things I think that is important is that we're communicating a lot with parents over the next week or so. We have done up till now, but we're sending out a really detailed letter, a homeschool agreement with all the things that their child will expect to see when they come back in, so that the parents can talk to the children before they face all these changes and differences, and comfort them and let them know what they're going to expect when they come through the gate.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, isn't it, to, you know, it's that kind of that first face that they see and making it as welcome as possible. And I think as staff, you know, showing that it is safe to return, and I think that really goes a real long way.
I think also, to add, if that's okay, what it sounds like you're doing is creating some element of certainty within this arena of so much uncertainty, and that's so important because there's so much happening out of our control, that those little things where we can feel certain about and a little bit more in control of is really helpful.
Absolutely. And we decided when we were planning the whole sort of return, we decided we would try and get them in for 4 days on the trot, consistent, to try and build them back into the normal routine. And then also we're incorporating every day, every class will have a wellbeing session, trying to build up outdoor learning with the segregation that's necessary. It's a massive planning feat, but we're managing it, and we're making sure the children are in school as much as we can get them in within the restrictions.
Absolutely. I've just seen a message here from Bridget, and she's saying she's in Austria at the moment, and they've started school on Monday. what kind of, and this is kind of an open question for everyone listening, what kind of things have, you know, schools putting in place that you're working in or that your child is attending? What they're kind of putting in place? And it'd be really good to see a few responses, and also really good to kind of share some good practice where we could.
From my point of view, our school, we've got all the sort of, I feel they're obvious restrictions, things like the one-way system in through the gate, in through one gate. Parents drop the children in the playground and leave through the other gate. So there's a one-way flow. And then also within the building, there's a one-way system built up. Parents have been asked not to linger, to leave the site straight away, not to come into the building. All communication will be through email and telephone. So all the safety arrangements that we're making are there for the parents' comfort, because I'm sure they're just as nervous about sending their children back as the children are about coming in.
Absolutely. Just around kind of secondary school age children, I'm very conscious. I've got, my sister is in year 11, and she's kind of missed, you know, her GCSEs that she's worked, you know, very hard for, you know, preparing. And I think if you look back and remember when you're that age, it's quite a big thing. Missing her prom, which, you know, is a bit of I guess it's a rite of passage. That kind of emotional saying goodbye to everybody, because that's, when you look at it, that's the last time that year group are all going to be together. And at, you know, 15, 16 years old, anyway, looking back when I remember, it's quite an emotional time anyway. What kind of extra challenges do you think, you know, secondary school age pupils, or students, shall I say, are going to be facing during this time?
You began to touch on some of it there, Chase, in that we can specifically look at mental health, but we can look at the effects on well-being overall. And especially when we're looking at those older students, the year 13s, the year 12s, the year 11s, and even the year 10s, who are a lot more aware of what's going on. You know, the issues that might arise in society and as a community, as well as their own mental health. And, you know, we have to understand that probably a lot of the young person's well-being has been compromised. The psychological, the physical, the emotional, the social, the environmental, and really having some compassion and empathy with that to begin with. Now, you know, we all remember our school days, and we know that, you know, a lot of motivation, optimism, hope were being focused on these exams, and that's now gone, and everything around that has disappeared a little bit. And it's that feeling of being held back that I think some of the older students will be going through, and how we might begin to instill that hope again and that little bit of optimism within them, and actually be really open and honest, because we don't yet know what the impact of them not physically doing the exams is going to have. They are going to have their results, but we don't know actually, as even a mental health practitioner, mental fitness practitioners, 2 or 3 years down the line, how might that impact on them? And we don't know, but what we can do is to begin to be proactive with assuming that it is going to have an impact. So that idea that, you know, the disruption to the exams, I think, is going to be a big factor. The other area is, especially around that age group, is that idea of social connection. And, you know, at that age, that's really important to a young person, because some of their friends are their emotional support network and psychological support network and well-being support network. So that feeling connected with friends and making sure that whether you're a parent, a carer, a school, how can you continue to promote that? I remember if I walked into the sixth form block or I met year 11s, there was a real strength in numbers between them. There was a camaraderie, because they were all about to, you know, take their exams and then go their separate ways perhaps. And that has gone as well. So how can we help them recreate that, whether it is an online ball or, you know, but we can be proactive. We can perhaps be a bit more creative and think creatively on how we can normalize it as much as possible. And then the third area I've touched on is just to understand that, you know, the young people, and especially the year 13s, 12s, you know, are aware of the impact that this might be having, not just on them, but on their parents and on their families. You know, they might not have seen grandparents. So just acknowledging that they're not too far removed from what we might be feeling as adults, with all this extra things that they might miss out on.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it there about kind of social connection. And Bridget, I've just seen, written about, she's a primary school teacher in Austria, and she's saying how the children are happy to be back, like I say, connecting with their friends. Speaking with a few schools the last week or so, there's the idea that some classes may kind of be split for a need for smaller groups, some children coming in at different times. How do you think, you know, that might affect kind of school children? And again, open to the panel, that one.
I think the really important thing with all of this is around being honest and facing up to the fact that this is having an impact. You know, I can remember very much when I was a child, you know, children weren't talked to about scary things. You know, it was dealt with by the grown-ups, and, you know, it wasn't appreciated that this had an impact on children. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation and it's being repeated all over the country is a really positive thing. I don't think that would have happened even, you know, 5-6 years ago. But I think, you know, if we can acknowledge to children, yeah, this is scary and it's not very nice and nobody likes it, and that's okay. It's okay to feel those things, because once you've expressed them and once you've expressed the fears, you've got a boundary around it then, you know, you've given it voice, and it stops becoming that great big sort of indefinable monster that gets bigger every time you think about it. If you go, actually, I am scared about this, then it's there and it's finite, and then you can deal with it. So that, you know, sort of hope for the best, prepare for the worst approach, I think sometimes can be really helpful in going, yeah, this isn't very nice and nobody likes it, rather than, you know, this whole kind of sort of jolly hockey sticks approach that is the easy way out and saying to children, it's all fine, don't worry about it. But actually, children are worrying about it, and we need to let them have a chance to say so.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
Yeah, in my line of work, that would be validating their emotions and giving them permission to know that it is okay to feel this way. And like Helen was saying, you know, we're all human, and anxiety is a normal emotion. We'll all be feeling different levels of anxiety at different times, but allowing the children to know, look, this is okay, and it's normal for you to feel this way, just validates that for them. So that's and that's part of the empathy thing, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zoe, I know we kind of work together in Croydon, and you're someone that knows the area quite well. You know, parts of Croydon, like kind of the rest of the country, have, you know, certain levels of kind of depravity. What kind of challenges do you think will be in place for those kind of children?
I think they're intrinsically vulnerable for all the different reasons we already know about, you know, right down to things like poor diet. And one of the things I've been involved in is helping get sort of vouchers for school food out to schools and to families and so on. But I think as well, you know, we've taken it for granted that children have been able to do lessons online. And, you know, for a lot of children, that's not been possible. You know, we're assuming that children are living in, you know, decent accommodation, and they're not. You know, what has the impact on, you know, poor housing been, on the fact that, you know, maybe mum and dad have got substance misuse problems, the impact of things like, you know, not knowing about enough food, how's that affecting parents' mental health and therefore their attitude towards the children. So I think, you know, I think it's something we do have to be mindful about in terms of that heightened level of vulnerability anyway, and then taking it on board. Some of those children might be desperately keen to get back to school because it's their safe, normal, happy place, you know, whereas equally, I think for some of them, it's going to be yet another stressor that's going to be almost unbearable. So I think, you know, it's very much teaching people to suck eggs, I know, but, you know, it's seeing each child as the individual and what is that child's own profile, and then, you know, what needs are they going to be within that group, you know, instead of just assuming that everybody is going to be the same. And I know that sounds very glib, but I think it's sometimes glib is good.
And also, I've just seen, Chase, a couple of questions come up similar about anxieties of children about which groups they're going to be put into, because their classes are going to be split, and it seems as if some of the children are feeling they're not going to be with their friends and things like that. So I think I mean, I would like to think that most of the schools will know vague friendship groups.
Yeah.
But if that's a real concern, then I would drop the school an email, sort of put that information into the school, and that will help them sort out the friendship groups. If your particular child is absolutely adamant they don't want to be without so and so, I think that will help the child and the school to make things smoother as the children come back.
I think absolutely. I think it may seem like such a, small worry, but actually I think just looking back, thinking back when you're at school and the teacher mentions pairs, there's that 5-10 seconds of absolute panic, trying to grab a pair and think about returning back to school after, so long off, and having that anxiety in your head that, you might not be with your best friend or stuck on your own is a real worry, I can imagine.
Chase, sorry, what I just wanted to add is I'm a positive psychology practitioner, so I like to see things from a positive mental health side as well. And I think it's important to also share the brilliant things that are going to happen when they do get back to school. Mm-hmm. And it's making sure that you balance that. So, of course, children are going to have those curious questions and feel anxious and be worried. But I think it's really important for parents, carers, teachers to also highlight what's going to be brilliant, what's going to be fantastic about them coming back to school. They are going to get to see their friends. They are going to have lots of space to work in. The teachers are really looking forward to seeing them. So I think just making sure that, the children are hearing some positivity also around going back to school will help to reduce some of that anxiety. And I think as adults, I think we can role model that, whether it's through our language, how optimistic we are that it's going to work, and it's best for our children. Like I really do think head teachers have got a hugely challenging job right now, and leadership teams, but I do believe they put the children and the parents first. And they're having to battle with 2 meters apart, and it is really, really tough. And I think as parents or practitioners, I think we can really help. I think we can really help by creating that mindset that yes, it's going to be a challenge, children, but there's going to be a lot that you can gain from it. You can have PE lessons again, and you can go onto your field, and you might see your favorite teacher again, and so on. So for me, it's important to add some positivity into returning back to school as much as we can to help with that anxiety.
There was another question. Sorry, there was another question there I just saw asking whether or not the groups of 15 and the separation is going to continue in September. I don't think anybody knows, do they, what the future will hold. This is how it is at the moment, and how we're going to have to introduce things, but things could change in a month. Things could change next week. So September, it's all in the hands of COVID and the government, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we can answer that.
I think there's just one thing that perhaps is a small glint of a silver lining in the fact that this has happened and children will be coming back as we finally start to have statutory relationships and health education in schools. There is actually now a government framework guidance on how these things are actually taught, and the fact that schools are now going to be teaching about things like understanding your emotions, getting help, who's in your support network. An enormous new curriculum will be there for schools to use, to build on, so that teachers will have that opportunity to say, we need to discuss this, and it's not going to be a bolt-on, it's going to be something that can be actually part of the curriculum. So in terms of timing, if there was ever going to be a good time for this kind of return to school to be happening, at a time when this has been foregrounded, when it is something that schools have or should have been planning for, when there's an enormous amount of resources out there in terms of supporting teachers and schools in delivering this in that kind of structured way, I think then that is a plank that schools and teachers can really start to use as a mechanism for dealing with delivering that empathy you know, having those sessions where it's okay to sit down and say, you know, I've had a really rough day. And that kind of validation, as Rona was saying, you know, having that as something that schools can tangibly use, I think will be a positive step.
Absolutely. I know both of you, kind of Sak and Zoe, you've touched on it. I guess, how can, you know, as parents at home that are worried, how can we model kind of positive psychology and kind of put in those kind of tips for parents at home whose children may be worried? How can we kind of foster that positive kind of psychology in them?
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Rona.
Go on.
Thank you, Rona. So for me, it's you know, they'll have taken a hit of confidence. So I'm just going to use the word confidence because you know, hopefully everybody can understand that. And there's things that parents and teachers can do to really help boost confidence. And you can ask some questions. So, for example, does a young person feel competent with the work that they're doing? Do they feel like they're getting somewhere with the work? And if we can share that with them, if we can instill that, so are they feeling that the work that they've done it competently, they've done it well? Can they see themselves having made progress over during lockdown? And I think really picking out the best pieces of work that they've done, or the really good things that they might have done with their families, with their siblings, so they get that sense, okay, it's not been a waste. I've actually learned something and I've developed something, even if it's online learning. Have they been able to make their own choices along the way? And can they still do that when they go back to school? So that little bit of autonomy that gives not just children, but adults, that feeling of confidence that actually I'm in control of what I'm doing. And then do they feel that connection to others? And I really liked what Helen said earlier, in that her teachers are actively speaking to their children. Now, that's not something that my youngest two have had, but I wish they'd had, because the power of their teacher calling them up and saying, X, how are you getting on? I just think is so powerful, and it keeps that connection going. So there are ways that you can boost a child's confidence, you know, and I think hopefully I've posed some questions that either a parent or a carer can ask, and just engage in that open conversation.
I think, to be honest, I think quite a lot of schools, I know definitely within Croydon, or teachers are making the effort to communicate with their pupils. It's not just us. I think an awful lot of schools are phoning children, and especially those that are vulnerable, and checking in on those, letting them hear a familiar face. On our home learning website, the teachers put on a little video to talk to the children. And then it is communication by telephone as much as possible. But we've also got to think, and I think it's quite important with our audience, that we've got to think about the teachers and the teachers' well-being, and what's being put in place for them. So, you know, we can't overburden the teachers. We're making sure that they've got a day away from school when they can get on with their planning, because not only are they planning for their in-school time, they're planning for their home learning. So we've tried to encourage teachers to mirror the home learning and the in-school planning, so that they're not sort of planning twice. You know, ensuring simple things like lots of refreshment stations around the school. But we're fortunate because we've got 2 adults in each of our bubbles, and we're managing to open 4 days a week. So it is difficult, but we're putting in as much as we can to support the staff as well.
God, I know you're itching.
I think I would add, just in terms of parents being able to model to their children, thinking about self-care, and that comes and it sort of brings up the question, what is self-care? And I think as parents, as adults, as teachers, we need to, if we're feeling worried about if we're feeling anxious, we need to think about, you know, what are our worries? What is it that's worrying us? So once we're able to identify what it is, then we're able to do something more about it. And that would apply the same with our young people. They can feel anxious, and you might be seeing anxious behavior. It might be coming through in the way that they're acting and behaving. And it would be, I would be encouraging you to sit down with your young person and ask them, you know, what are your worries? Like, specifically, what's going through your mind right now? And writing that down and going through it together. It might be that they're worrying about not being with their friends, or it might be not knowing what to expect when you go back to school. But if you're able to unpick what those specific worries are, then you can answer them as a parent. You can contact the school and make sure you've got all the information, so that the information you're then providing for your child is the correct information. So you're setting them up with the expectation of knowing what to expect when they go back to school. It might be more of a worry about even going outside. And for that, I'd be thinking about almost setting up a little bit of a ladder of breaking it down step by step. If your child's afraid of going outside and you're worrying about how you're going to get your child to school, start off with walking to the bottom of the drive and standing there for 2 minutes, coming back in, and the next day trying to extend on that and building it up, so that your child's building up their confidence, but equally realizing that although there's a lot of scary stuff going on and there's a lot of scary talk going on, actually immediately around us, we're okay. You know, danger isn't right outside our front door. We're okay. And as long as, and I think it's also important for schools to be letting parents know what they're doing as well. And it sounds like your school, Helen, are doing a really good job of that. Because again, there's lots of unanswered questions, and the unanswered questions are what's triggering anxiety. And it's hard, isn't it? Because nobody's been through this before. Nobody, not the government, anybody, we haven't lived through a pandemic before. So a lot of this is, we're hypothesizing of what we expect might happen. And everybody's working really hard, by the sounds of it, to try to do their best to figure out how best to support young people, which is great. But identifying, just going back to my original point, when we feel worried and we can feel it in our bodies, it'd be really important to think about, right, what is it that's going through my mind right now? And if you're able to then manage your worries, you're better placed to then manage your children's worries.
Absolutely. Really, really good points there, and real practical ways, I think, you know, as parents, that we can kind of start modeling these behaviors. Absolutely fantastically well said. I know, Helen, you touched a little bit on teachers and teacher wellbeing, and Zoe, I know I've done a few mental health first days with you, kind of upskilling teachers around it. You know, how important is it that schools kind of support teachers as well as going back in?
Well, it's so important, because they've got their anxieties too. I mean, we've had a lot of staff voice the fact that they're nervous. There is the fear of the unknown for them. Are they having protective equipment? So we've had to sort of talk to our staff quite a lot and try and relieve their anxieties. And again, it's about communication, letting them know exactly what we're putting in place to try and not minimise, but to lower those fears, just to make them realise that we are trying our best to think of what needs to be put in place for them. And just the planning day, they're getting the time to plan, the fact that they're not planning up double the amount. There was something else I was thinking of as well, I've forgotten it. Oh, the fact that the work, we're not expecting teachers to mark the work, they're not supposed to be taking books home. We're just absolutely grateful that we've got staff that are going in, to be honest, and that we've got a really good, strong team that are supporting the school and supporting the children. And I'm sure all schools are the same. So
Zoe, how can schools become like a more mentally healthy place coming back in, returning through? I know we've done a lot of work around that. Are there any tips at all for schools or teachers or head teachers that may be listening?
I think it's about acknowledging the fact that emotions are going to be absolutely driving everything, whether we want to face up to that or not. You know, however professional we want to be, the fact is we will all have different feelings. There'll be those teachers who are relieved, those teachers who are terrified, there'll be those parents who are resentful, the parents who are you know, desperate for their children to go back, you know. And one of the key questions, I think, to just ask ourselves when we're planning anything, or you know, when we're trying to do something, is just take that moment to go, how is this making me feel? Because that will tell you something about, you know, how it's going to work. And I think, you know, being actually open and saying, as Helen was just saying, nobody's done this before. You know, I'm in the middle of reading a book about the 1918 flu, and actually there's a scary number of parallels, but you know, in this technological age and in the society we're in, you know, in Croydon, nobody's done it before. And as everybody's been saying, yeah, no, we are making it up as we go along with the best intentions and the best advice that we have. But you know, acknowledging those feelings, putting in place those mechanisms to talk about it. I mean, I don't know anybody else, but I grew up, you know, if you were upset, it was stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for. And you know, moving away from that, yeah, it is scary, and allowing that to be openly expressed is important, and acknowledging that for some children the experiences will have been very, very negative during lockdown. And for teachers, you know, we don't know what teachers' experiences have been. Some schools will have experienced bereavement, some families will have done, you know, families might not have been able to see each other, and all of that, this huge kind of sort of morass of emotion. And actually, as I think as Rona said, you know, if we just take that, even the first few weeks, to stand back and go, right, okay, how is this making us feel? What can we do about it? How can we you know, unpick all of this? And because once we know, you know, that it's affecting us in this way, then we can do things about it. But being open about this, I think, is you know, and the single biggest thing I think we can do. You know, actually acknowledge the fact that, and that's hard, you know, especially for parents and teachers, because parents and teachers are the ones who make everything better. You know, you're the parent, you know what you're doing. The teacher, you're in charge, particularly the senior leaders in schools, and making sure that actually we look after those who do the looking after is really important as well. Yes. So have those conversations. There's huge amounts of resources out there. The Anna Freud Centre has got enormous amounts of resources. They're absolutely brilliant, made by children for children. A lot of work on there about adult well-being as well for parents and teachers. I can't recommend that highly enough. All of it's free. So if people are looking for things that they want to be able to kind of download, read at their leisure, have a look on those. Schools educational psychology teams are there to help. You know, obviously colleagues like Rona, God, sorry, my glasses have gone all misty. And SAC, you know, all those teams are there to help, and don't be afraid to ask that help.
Absolutely.
The Anna Freud information and links and resources that you've sent, I think you sent them through to the schools, absolutely fantastic. I've looked at those and passed them on to the teachers. All sorts of activities that they can do within the classroom, sort of short 2-minute thinking things, to yoga sessions and mindfulness, outdoor learning ideas. There's absolutely loads.
And they're all research based as well. Activities, I mean, there's 90 odd different strategies of activities to try for practicing self-care, for example. And I think what's important here is if something's not working, you know, move on to something else in terms of self-care. If something's working and you're noticing that you're feeling a bit better, or your child's feeling a bit better, keep doing it. Keep doing more of what works well. If something's not working, then try something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to read a comment here because I think Joe makes a really good point, and he says kind of, if some parents don't understand the value, you know, of self-care and kind of modeling behaviours and a kind of general understanding of mental health, you know, how can they, you know, kind of model those behaviours for their children? Is there, you know, a space for definitely schools to run kind of workshops for their parents around kind of mental health awareness, etc.? Because I think we're very much in an age now, I think, completely agree, our children know more around mental health, potentially more than their parents, because they're exposed to more mental health awareness stuff within schools. How important do you think it is to, you know, also educating the children, but also parents as well?
For me, Chase, I use the term mental fitness, and you know, the reason I use it because it simplifies mental health for people, because it can really sound overwhelming when people start talking about mental health. And the way that I use mental fitness as a coach, it's almost like we do have a good understanding of physical health and physical fitness. So you carry out physical fitness to improve your physical health. And if you approach mental health in the same way and think about, how do I get mentally fitter? And Rona, Zoe, and Helen have touched on it, is that you have to be intentional. You have to do things that you know will improve your mental health. So one really simple one is physical activity. Okay, so physical activity we know is good for physical health, but actually it is hugely important for our mental health. So that's an intentional activity that I can do to improve my mental health. Another intentional way of thinking. So if I think with a growth mindset about a particular situation or a particular problem, I'm going to find really proactive ways to deal with that issue. I'm going to find some resources, and I'm going to be able to cope because I'm looking at a specific problem with a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. Now that takes effort, it takes focus, it takes commitment, just as it does if you are going to the gym or having a game of tennis. So I think my message is that be intentional, have that conversation, or look for that one activity that might help you with your emotions. As Rona was saying, it's got to fit what you want and what you need, and just stick to that, and almost see it like a exercise plan. But this is an exercise plan for your mental health. Whether you're a teacher, you know, if it's, for example, if it is your resilience that you want to develop, because you know that's going to improve your mental health, and you can use that as a coping strategy, then go out and look for those activities that will help your resilience. Or if it's your emotions, or if it's using your strengths. So I think my message is be intentional, just as you would with physical health.
Yeah, it's having that awareness, but it also includes things like appetite, eating well, not skipping meals, thinking about healthy sleep patterns, and sleep hygiene, alongside exercise, and even down to sort of being kind, and having that awareness that, you know, we don't know how other people are feeling right now, and kindness is free, and that's all part of the self-care package.
Can I just say that we, one of the things we thought about just off the top of my head was the fact that children at the moment are able to graze, and they're not going to be used to the strict routine of school lunches at this time, and you're not allowed anything either side apart from maybe a piece of fruit. So we're encouraging them to bring in some sort of snack, or not sweets, or chocolate is our guidelines, I think, but just sort of that, you know, they know they've got their little snack that they can have. And also we found a link, and I don't know if it can be passed on, to playground games that can be done with social distancing in mind. So that could be helpful. And as for PE, somebody asked about PE lessons. Our PE coach is running athletics at the moment, because I think that's the least contact. He can run an athletic session without children necessarily needing to come into contact.
And it's in season as
well. Foggers, they're called disinfectant machines that fog any equipment that need fogging. So at the end of a PE session, when the children have all gone in, he can quickly fog the discuses or whatever he needs to fog, and it's ready for the next group.
Perfect. Last little question for me. Speaking to a few teachers the last few weeks, I think their main fear and worry is that they're going to return to school and there's going to be going to be overwhelmed by the amount of support that certain children need. How can we, I guess, specifically looking at a child with anxiety or depression, how can we best support those individual children? What kind of strategies are there? I know we've touched on a little bits and pieces here and there, but Rona, do we have any kind of specific strategies for that?
Yeah, I definitely think, first of all, in terms of our communication approach, we touched on empathy earlier. Empathy is huge. Empathy is, so we've got empathy versus sympathy. And empathy is more about recognizing where the person's at and joining them there. So it would be sort of phrases along the lines of, gosh, I can see that you're struggling here. I can see that this is really hard for you, and validating how they feel. And that opens up the space for change. So then at that point, we want to be asking what are they worried about? What's going through their mind? Can you tell me what's going through your mind right now? Talk to me. Tell me what you're worrying about. And we want to be picking through and identifying what those worries are, because again, once we know what the worries are, we're able to either validate the emotion, and that's part of relationship building, validating the emotion. If that person feels understood, then that's a helpful, and listening is an intervention on its own. But also if it's something that can be done in order to change whatever it is, or maybe the person needs further explanation or further information in order to put the worry back into context, for example. I think for schools it would be important for them to, especially secondary schools, everybody needs to know what is available. And it's not just for those children that necessarily come direct for help. Everybody needs to know what support is available, where they can go, who will be available on what days. And when they come to you, sitting down, listening to what they've got to say, if there's capacity for this, which hopefully there will, because, you know, mental health will trump education, as Zoe said at the beginning. You know, mental well-being is paramount here. Nothing can happen if we're not mentally well. But listening to what they've got to say, listening to their worries, unpicking what the worries are, and then thinking about how you can problem solve them together.
Fantastic, thank you, Rona. And I think just touching on your points that just listening on its own is enough. We're not trying to, you know, in some cases, you know, we're not qualified to be solving these issues, but listening, you know, non-judgmentally is such an important tool. You know, when a young person comes up to you, yeah, really, really important.
There's a lovely YouTube video by Brené Brown called "The Power of Empathy," and empathy is the #1 characteristic of relationship building. And if you can demonstrate, so when someone comes to you and you're able to demonstrate empathy, like I said, that alone allows them to feel listened to and in turn understood.
Perfect.
And I think that builds trust as well, and you can't learn from somebody you don't trust. And so, you know, if your teacher, even if they can't actually help you, but they've sat down and they've listened and they've shown that they care about you as an individual, I think, you know, that on its own is as much a part of building that learning relationship as building that human relationship.
Absolutely. And we want to be avoiding that, well, at least you know, at least we want to be avoiding those types of they're the sympathy statements. We want to be going to core that does sound rubbish.
That would make me sad.
Fantastic. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to ask a question just around when the children do get back, when that is. What are the priorities of a head teacher? Obviously, there's going to be kind of that gap in learning missed for some children. You know, what are the priorities kind of this side of the half term, or this side of the school year, and also looking forward to the next academic year? That's I know Helen's eyebrows raised then. Or
well, I think the priorities, if the children come back on the 1st of June, the initial priorities are their well-being and making sure that they're ready to be back in school there. Because if they're anxious and nervous and not used to the routines, then they're not going to be able to learn. So it is unpicking all those worries and anxieties, and then building in the curriculum. We won't be doing assessments probably until September, so it will be teaching. There will be continued teaching, so we will be teaching the curriculum, but I think it will be more relevant to see where they are after the 6-week break. I mean, teachers are assessing obviously all the time, so they'll have a feel for where their children are and what they need and who needs extra support to catch them up, but no formal assessment straight away by any means.
And I love to hear that. I love to hear that because with the anxieties that some children will already have, extra layers of pressure, extra layers of meeting deadlines, tests, all of that it's just, I just think that's secondary in the first instance. Let everyone get settled back. Absolutely. New routines, get used to getting a bit more certainty back into life, and then
I mean, I'm not dismissing the fact that teachers are planning maths and English lessons, and the morning will be academic work, but it will be slightly different, I think, from the normal in the afternoons, and it will be about finding out, celebrating what the children have done at home, bringing in. I love the idea. Somebody put up an idea of a home learning exhibition.
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Celebrate, and a huge display.
Yeah.
So much to it, but you can't ignore the fact that obviously we've got to educate them as well as.
Absolutely, and I'm not saying, and I'm not denying that. I guess it's more the targets that comes second.
Sorry, Rona, but I do think more people will have a better understanding of the impact of mental ill health now. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that we've reached a tipping point where people can see the benefits of actually really focusing on children's and our own mental health and well-being. Of course, SATs results, exams, hugely important to increase life chances of young people and for their future goals and ambitions. But I think we're beginning to realize that actually their mental health and well-being, we have to put it on equal footing. Now, how schools do that, that's down to individual schools, but I've no doubt that they will find the creative ways to do that. And I think, Helen, everything she shared, I think Zoe, Rona and I have been like, what, it's fantastic what you're doing. And only so much can be done in the next 4 or 5 weeks. I think let's not kid ourselves that all of a sudden we're going to be able to rechange the world in 4 to 5 weeks. But I think taking a systematic, proactive approach to mental health, mental fitness, well-being will only benefit the children in the long run. And I think that, I applaud Helen for the bits that you've shared with us, and I'm sure you and your staff are doing a lot more.
Yeah, there's one more question there about the year sixes, which we really feel for. Obviously, they're missing an awful lot this term. Yeah. Whether or not we'll be having leaver assembly or school play, we haven't made I don't think we've made a final decision, I'm not sure, but the school play I don't think will be possible with the social distancing rules and all the rest of it. But we're hoping to, if we can't do a leavers assembly or a leavers party this year, then we'll be inviting them all back when they're at the secondary schools to sort of finish off their primary school and create some lovely memories when it's all safe to do so. So that will definitely happen, but it may not happen before they've actually moved on.
Absolutely. Guys, I think we're bang on 6 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up shortly. I'm just looking through from the comments about sharing certain things. I think there's stuff around playground games. I know Nick Miller has mentioned about AFP sending out a new guidance providing PE in light of kind of COVID-19. I think what we'll try and do, I know a lot of you guys have mentioned a few resources. If you guys send them in to me, and if I kind of collate them, and then myself or someone from our organisation, we able to send them out, whether that's on our website or sending them through an email. I'm not too sure, but we'll make sure that we try and get those resources that we've kind of mentioned available to people. I think that'd be really useful. And again, if you have any more guys that you can kind of come to light, then just drop us an email and I'll be able to kind of add them on. Yeah. Listen, guys, I think we're going to wrap up there. I know it's my dinner time almost. I'm sure it's yours as well. Listen, thank you very much for kind of giving up your time and being part of the panel today. And also you guys kind of listening at home, thank you very much for getting involved. Some really good questions in there, which is good to see. And hopefully that's been a bit of use anyway. I think we're planning to do a bit of a survey monkey. It's the first kind of thing webinar like I've done. So I think we're going to try and send out a survey monkey. So it'd be really good to kind of get your opinions. And definitely potentially be able to do another one, maybe looking at year 6 transition to year 7, which I'm sure a lot of teachers, a lot of parents are kind of have that in their mind at the moment. But guys, thank you very much. Thanks for listening, guys. Yeah, and have a great evening and take care. And
cheers. Thank you to you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
to
you.
you and Sam
Thanks,
and
everybody.
Paris for Life for putting it together.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank you. And Sam, if we could just share that last slide. Don't know if he's listening or not.
It's muted.
Are we still on air? No.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh,
There we
go.
are.
Thank you, everybody. That was I really enjoyed that.
Cool. Rona, I'm mortified that I got your name wrong. I'm so
I
sorry.
got your name wrong at one stage. Are we
No.
still live? I think we're still live.
We're still live, guys.
Yeah.
Well, hands up. I've